This episode is brought to you by New Bloom Labs. New Bloom Labs is a testing facility that tests plant material for potency, monitoring, full panel analysis, and official state testing compliance. The company has locations in Tennessee and Texas, and more to come soon. They test intermediate manufacturing materials such as crude, isolate, distillate, and they also test final consumer products such as edibles, topicals, beverages, cartridges, pre-rolls, keef, you name it. And did I mention that New Bloom Labs always does a next business day turnaround on potency tests? That's right. 1 to 2 business day turnaround on terpene profiles and screenings for heavy metals, pesticides, residual solvents, and mycotoxins. Superior science, rapid results. That's what you get from New Bloom Labs. Hello, everyone. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Doug Gordon, EVP and head of LeafLink Financial. Here. All right, we're recording. Doug Gordon, what's up, man? It's been a while.
Definitely, dude. It's been about 10 years since we saw each other at Bucknell.
I know, right? Ray Bucknell. But for those of you who don't know, Doug and I actually went to college together at Bucknell in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. And Doug, you graduated a year before me. So, but we were there for 3 years together, and it's been like you said, 10 years, man. So what's been going on? What's new with you these days?
A lot's been new. I joined LeafLink back in 2018 to jump on the Cannabis roller coaster. And it's been, an absolutely fantastic ride so far, and super excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, man, I'm excited too. It looks like you've come a long way. I know that you kind of started your footing with your career in like the financial sector, right? So, talk a little bit about, post Bucknell, what your career looked like, and then when you made that transition to cannabis.
Yeah, sure. So I studied neuroscience. I said Bucknell. Then when it came to my year, I had working on since my junior year, which ended up becoming a company called Foundation, which I decided not to go the Wall Street route right out of college, and ended up moving into my grandma's house to pursue entrepreneurship. And Foundation was a fintech company before fintech was really a mainstream word. Foundation grew to be one of the larger small business digital lending companies in the country. So we lent off our balance sheet, gave loans and lines of credit to small businesses throughout the country. But we did so by partnering with major financial institutions and B2B companies to provide capital at the time of need. So we partnered with major banks, like super regional banks and community banks, to essentially become their small business back office. So we digitized the way that you could capture and underwrite small business loans. And so when you would walk into a branch or you'd apply online for a business loan with your bank, that would be our technology, and we would be able to write the credit strategy of those banks into our technology. And if the bank liked it, they'd be able to book it, and we earned a fee. But if they didn't like it, but we liked it, we'd leverage our capital to continue to provide capital to that business, and ultimately allow those banks to serve more businesses than they would have otherwise been able to. But we also had a very large business-to-business practice where we'd partner with companies selling to other businesses, sometimes as big as multi-billion down to $10 million businesses, and work with their credit management departments to understand the capital needs of their customers, and then work with their sales team to design different products outside of just net terms to allow their customers to have expansive purchasing power, but also allow those sales teams to close more sales and just give liquidity options to their customers. So we did that since 2000. Started in 2010. Was at the company for the last 8 years. We were private equity owned as of 2013. We had backers on the debt side with Goldman Sachs, a number of hedge funds throughout New York. Grew to be a very sizable company. And during the time at Foundation, we were starting to work with a number of B2B companies on the software side, both B2B marketplaces and software solutions for companies to introduce capital at the time of need. And I've known the CEO of LeafLink for about 7 years now. He had a similar path than me. as me, where he started a company right out of college, and we had a common investor friend that put us together. And when he was starting LeafLink with Zach, Ryan Smith's the CEO, who I'm speaking to, and Zach Silverman's co-founder, who's our CTO. They contacted me around 2015 and told me that they were, thinking about starting a B2B marketplace for the cannabis industry. And I had just worked on a few B2B marketplace integrations at Foundation, and I was super intrigued with what they were trying to accomplish. I think my classic line to them was, once you guys break $50 million of GMV, this becomes super interesting. And I think Ryan called me $50 million in one to get my take on how they should be introducing fintech to their marketplace. So that's how I ended up here. But super excited I made the transition, and we started building LeafLink Financial for LeafLink back in 2018. Launched the product in 2019, and ultimately that followed my thesis of like where fintech was going. Fintech version one, which ultimately was Foundation, really focused on automating the pain points involved in underwriting small business credit. But this was happening across consumer loans and other types of liquidity, using technology to automate back office processes, using data to better underwrite, using data aggregation techniques to take on multiple data sources at a given time, and then completely automating the decisioning of that. So you can really decrease the time that you can introduce liquidity from what was taking 3 to 6 weeks down to really a day. So that was V1, but V2 was how to use that technology and embed it into the places where business owners are and what their time of need is. And what we realized by integrating to so many B2B marketplaces was the checkout experience is completely different than a B2C marketplace.
So your path, right? Entrepreneurship. So you've always had that niche. You've always, right out of college, you said, I don't want to be Wall Street. You saw, I guess, a gap or a need in the fintech space when it related to B2B, in the B2B space, right? So you kind of worked on that. You got introduced to your CEO and your CTO, and you had a common investor. So it seemed like you all kind of came to the knight's table and you all had different skill sets that you brought, right? And yours in particular was the fintech background.
Yeah, that's correct. So my entire career has been in financial technology on the lending side, and I was just a friendly advisor to Ryan when he was starting his first company. We kept in contact. We'd get a beer every once in a while, grab lunch when we could, talk about the woes of being someone who never had a job before trying to start a company. And as we continue to both find success separately, we never really talked about how to work together, but it became more and more obvious that was going to be an awesome opportunity given what he was building at LeafLink, and how we were both thinking about the ways you can introduce financial technology to more traditional software offerings. So it was a really, really interesting marriage. And I think we started talking about it more seriously 2016, 2017. And then as the cannabis industry continued to boom, it just became an absolute no-brainer to put our skill sets together and make something happen.
Yeah, and you guys saw that trend even in a state where, I mean, it's just decriminalized, right? I think New York State is medical also, but not adult use at this point. So even back then in 2015 or 14, when you were starting these discussions, it really didn't matter where you were geolocated. You were looking at the other states that were operating, right? And you saw that opportunity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when we first started talking, I think Colorado was, had just gone, recreational. And, I wasn't even fully convinced at that time that this was going to be the type of green wave that we've seen over the past few years. But, Ryan was very persistent in making sure that he'd give me updates on the company and showed the growth. And I started paying attention more and more. And then as you start paying attention, you realize that like, this is almost inevitable, right? This almost has to happen. And I think that what we've seen, from 2015 to 2018 was a tremendous, growth and adoption. But even from 2018 to 2020, and what we've even seen through COVID, I mean, I think the cat's out of the bag, and the industry is primed to continue to boom.
Right, and that's when you said that famous line of when you hit what 50 million, and he called you then because.
Yeah.
This green wave was for real. And isn't it crazy? Like, think about back when we were at Bucknell in college, and like how fast things have progressed. Like, I don't know if I would have ever thought within 10 years that we would make so much progress in terms of public support and the states overturning the federal regulations, right? It's pretty astounding.
I think if you told you and I back in 2010 we're going to be having this conversation 2020, it wouldn't have been on our mind as a potential opportunity, which is kind of funny to look back on because it didn't even cross my mind, even the first 5-6 years of my career, that this would be where I'd end up. But it's been incredible to watch the industry grow, and I think there's a very rare opportunity where you can see an industry in its nascent phase and really define how it can operate and grow in a way that other supply chains haven't been able to form as a result of not having access to the same type of technology that the cannabis industry does today.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I went to the Texas Hemp Convention in January, I was like, I was just shocked, man. I was walking around and I just was in amazement of how many facets and how many just different aspects of the areas that this industry touches. I mean, and we haven't even scratched the surface on the industrial hemp side, you know? So my thought process walking in was, where do I fit into all this? You know, like I'm not a farmer, I'm not a I'm not a financial expert. I'm not, I'm a marketing guy. I have a marketing background, but like, and so it was just kind of a natural fit into this podcast. But it's crazy, man. And so let's get back to LeafLink. So we talk about a lot on this podcast the difficulty that cannabis companies face when it comes to finding a bank that's willing to provide basic depository services, loans, other financial services like you've touched on. So what I'm really fascinated about with LeafLink is how you've hyper focused on the B2B side of it, the B2B marketplace, and that's really your strong suit in your background. So talk about LeafLink Financial and what differentiates you guys from others.
Yeah, so LeafLink Financial was born out of the concept of where there's transaction, there's opportunity to introduce liquidity at the time of need. So LeafLink has grown so tremendously since Ryan gave me that call after $50 million of GMV. We're now processing over $3.2 billion on an annualized basis, which represents about 32% of the wholesale cannabis market. So with that growth and the number of users that we have a very unique vantage point as to just who's transacting with who, but what are the needs of these businesses. And as LeafLink has become the centerpiece of where invoices are created, every single operator in the space has this challenge of how do you settle those transactions. Payments are something that most, and I think that we're all very accustomed to paying very easily on the marketplaces that we interact with on the B2C side. But on the B2B side, those transactions are much more complex than just putting your credit card information in, pressing checkout, and giving a shipping address. I've always seen that B2B transactions have really four main pillars. There's credit management, which is who are my customers? How do I introduce terms to them? How do I underwrite what limit they should get? And how do I know they're going to pay me? There's invoice reconciliation. You're not just buying a bag of gummies, you're buying pallets of them and maybe cartridges as well from that same manufacturer. So how do I know I got what I asked for? There's no damaged products, credits were applied, discounts were applied. So even at the time of delivery, there's still some kind of negotiation that can happen and there could be disputes that happen. You need to be able to account for that on the final invoice price. Then there's payment mechanisms where in every single B2B transaction, cards are in the traditional economy not wise because there's an interchange fee. Therefore, ACH and check is very common. And obviously in cannabis, cash is king. And then there's cash flow management, where there's ultimately an inherent disconnect between when a buyer wants to pay and when a seller wants to get paid. So you can't just introduce one aspect of that onto a marketplace and expect people to be able to transact to solve for all of them. And I think a lot of people focus on payment mechanism in the cannabis space because that's the easiest pain point to solve or to think through, not necessarily to solve. But you can't just introduce a way to pay and expect people to utilize it, given all of the the different elements I just discussed.
I was just going to add to that was all the variables you mentioned, in addition to the differences in regulation by state, right? I mean, all these states operate under different regulations and laws. So I bet that isn't even a big variable to account for when you're putting these invoice agreements together and these other agreements together.
Yeah, totally. I mean, every problem I just discussed are on steroids in the cannabis economy because of the different regulations and the limitations around what you can and cannot do relative to banking and payment rails and just availability of data. And so we spent a lot of time, working with council and looking at the state-by-state regulations. We focused on cannabis state by state. We was focused on commercial lending state by state, and then focused on the banking regulations, so we could build something that was compliant, that could be widely utilized by every user in our market. So after going through that, those thought exercises, we're able to put together an infrastructure that allows for us to, broadly buy invoices from sellers on our platform and give them the ability to introduce net terms to their customer. So buyers would afford the benefit of getting net 30 terms. We're able to buy that invoice from the sellers at a true sale. So we take them, but they get paid on day one, and they don't have to bear that working capital expense of waiting 30 days to pay. And this gives us the opportunity to centralize the payables of all of our buyers, and introduce credit limits that meet the needs of their business, and give them uniformity around who they're paying, what terms they're being offered, and knowing that they have available credit to grow and expand their business. Liquidity is king, and there's not much liquidity available in Canada's economy. So we do everything via we're introducing accounted for, really introduce credit. We're able to digitally reconcile invoices on the platform. We're able to have money flow on the ACH rails through our bank partnerships. And then we're also introducing, cash flow management tools that give, buyers terms, and then give sellers the ability to have payment accelerated and guaranteed.
Right. I mean, all that's amazing. That's amazing solution that any B2B wholesale buyer or seller would want. Right. And one thing also that as you're talking that I'm thinking about is how you're talking with potential buyers or sellers who've been vetted also. Right. We know that there's a lot of bad actors in the space currently, especially within the CBD side of the market. And so talk a little bit about LeafLink Financial's like vetting process when it comes to having buyers or sellers within their marketplace.
Yeah. So first off, we don't deal in the CBD hemp world. We only operate with the THC world, licensed entities across states. So the first check that we have is just the way that the marketplace is built, which is a licensing structure. So we operate across 27 different markets, but all the licenses have to match up to be allowed to transact together. Therefore, every single state operates as its own independent marketplace. So first, we're continuously validating, the license being in good standing. These are licensed operators. But what's super interesting about the platform is that we're sitting on, billions of dollars of transactional data, where we're able to organize that to allow us to see who's buying, what's the relationship data, buyers, how much are they buying, how consistent are they buying. And you can see trends to see, who's growing, who has a need for, liquidity. You're able to see who may not be paying as a result of some of the data that we're able to see. And we're able to bear that credit risk on behalf of our sellers to use that data intelligently, and ultimately, create our own D&B of cannabis, or Dun & Bradstreet of cannabis, which is something that most traditional B2B operators in the economy utilize to underwrite their customers. So that doesn't exist in cannabis, but we've been able to organize our data to allow us to see what are the trends of good and bad actors, to ensure that we're providing services to those that need it and deserve it.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would utilize that data internally to help improve, processes, or even inform your customers. Is there any plans to utilize the data, outwardly, maybe, and monetize the data that you're collecting?
Maybe eventually. I think you got to make sure that it works first. I think that's so far. You don't build a bureau based upon 2 years of credit performance. You need to see how things trend over time. But what we do is we actually utilize our marketplace data and have a product we call Insights, which gives good overviews of what's happening in these various markets to help both the buyers and sellers operate more efficiently in their given market. So we started to monetize that data on a relative basis. We're not trying to blow it out, because we want to make sure that these customers are using it intelligently, and we're getting feedback and understanding what works and what doesn't work.
Right.
On the credit side, I think we definitely would want to make that data available once we know it can be relied upon. And I think that our performance so far in our portfolio has been tremendous. We recently closed a very large dev facility, which has allowed us to expand our services offering to nearly all the territories on LeafLink. But I think after a few more months or maybe in a year of performance and understanding what slopes and what doesn't, it's definitely something that's on our roadmap to introduce to clients so they can better know their customers and better know how to do business with each other.
Yeah, that's definitely a sound approach that you're taking. You know, you don't want to move too fast, and you want to make sure that the data efficacy is there, and you know those insights are informative and actionable, right? If you're going to try to monetize, so kudos and you know good approach there. Um, I do want to talk to you, Doug. Like you, one more thing before I move on is you mentioned you're not in the CBD space currently. Is there any plans to do so in the future as more cannabinoids are going to be discovered?
I think it's definitely in the back of our minds. I think that the legal markets for licensed entities are so, and it's in such a growth mode right now that we want to stay hyper focused on ensuring that as these states continue to mature, we're helping these licensed entities continue to improve their business and their relationships with one another. Um, Obviously, with the election, and what we talked about before, there's more and more tailwinds, pushing forward, broader legalization and, more access to services and whatnot, which ultimately will wrap in, the CBD and hemp world. And I think that it's something that we're paying attention to, but ultimately we want to stay hyper focused on ensuring that, the core businesses that we're serving, which are the licensed entities in each state, are main point of attention over the next year at least.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at least focus on the core competency for now. That makes sense. So let's switch gears and talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, which is, of course, on everybody's mind. Tell me, Doug, how LeafLink has navigated through these uncertain times, and if there's been any pivots or any things that y'all have had to do from an operational standpoint or a business model standpoint. And what do you see post-COVID for the company?
Yeah, so obviously COVID took us all by surprise. And as a company in hyper growth mode, who's hiring a number of people day in, day out, having to shift remote and having an industry that is also a startup with all of our companies that are startups in hyper growth mode as well. There's a lot of questions that had to be answered and a lot of changes that had to be made. But when we went remote, actually, I think it was a really testament to our culture that we were able to really not miss a beat. There was questions to what was going to happen with cannabis and how that was going to affect our customer business. There's really three major questions that we were asking ourselves. Number one, was cannabis going to be deemed essential? Number two, what is the demand going to look like? As more and more people became unemployed, and there was talks of the stimulus, but was that money going to be used to purchase cannabis? And then was there going to be supply chain disruption, knowing how a pandemic and transportation and shipments were all going to be affected. And we were pleasantly surprised to see that cannabis was deemed essential, which was a huge win for not just our business but the industry as a whole. And we saw demand go through the roof, at least for the first few months, and we saw it stabilize. So when we went remote, we were concerned, but at the same time, we were very bullish on the industry and its viability. And when it came to what happened post COVID, our portfolio on the financial side performed tremendously well. We didn't suffer any losses as a result of the pandemic. Our GMV on the platform continued to increase at a rapid rate. I think we had our highest GMV day of the year, the Monday after the world started shutting down. But then we started to see companies adapt. And I think that was the most promising thing that we saw on our platform was, sales stabilized, demand was there, supply chain disruption didn't happen. And we saw, retailers and brands adapt to the new world very, very quickly. I think that is a testament to the fact that the majority of our industry is a bunch of entrepreneurs trying to make their business great. And as things happen, people react and they do what's best for them and their business. And we saw certain companies have 20% increase in sales. We saw other ones have 20% dips, but overall we saw things stabilize and people adapt to the new normal. And, as for LeafLink, we continue to grow our employee base. We've hired dozens of employees over the course of this year. And we were able to close a dev facility in cannabis in a global pandemic, which I think is a good testament to our business but also the viability of the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there was so many obviously devastating and unfortunate things that have happened during the pandemic, but those one of those pandemic pros obviously was cannabis, right? And a win for the industry as a whole in terms of, like you said, businesses being deemed essential. The recent sweep in the election in terms of the 5 states that passed legalization for adult use in medical. So it's clear that public support is obviously growing. So it's great to hear that companies like LeafLink and other cannabis companies in the industry were able to thrive and adapt and overcome this adversity. And it really seemed like the industry as a whole stepped up and did that. Everything from performance, but also like operationally, making sure that they were operating safely and doing the curbside pickups on the retail side and making sure that contactless pickup or whatever. So it was just a true testament to the industry, and we should really be proud of that. I think.
I completely agree with that. I was amazed to get calls from our customers, telling us what they're going to do to, set up a curbside pickup operation or set up a delivery operation, and did so in time periods that are typically like 6-month business initiatives. They set up in 2 weeks. And I think that there was a lot of technology that existed, like Dutchie or iHeartGene, that helped accelerate that. And obviously, LeafLink being a digital marketplace, allowing for orders to continue to happen naturally, even though sales reps weren't walking into dispensaries. I think the technology infrastructure was there to help support the industry, but the way that everyone reacted and was able to, maintain business operations, not as normal, but as this new normal, has been really tremendous to watch. I think it's a true testament to the type of entrepreneurs we have in the industry.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier also the stigma that needs to be removed from the plan, and that's also a big mission of mine in terms of educating and informing the public regarding the benefits of the cannabis plant. But also, if you look at again how we just talked about how the industry responded to COVID, that should be another testament in terms of removing the stigma. It's not just a bunch of stoners anymore that are lazy or not business savvy and whatnot. There's legacy people within the industry, but then there's also professionals in different disciplines that are coming into the industry and making a difference, and it's really showing, and it's looking like cannabis is pioneering in some areas, and it's just exciting to see. It's a great time. um Doug,
No, it's definitely true.
yeah. So Doug, in addition to the challenges that y'all faced during COVID and how you overcame them, let's talk about the regulatory environment. And we touched on it earlier. No banking laws, the Safe Banking Act hasn't passed. So how does that affect LeafLink and LeafLink Financial's businesses?
Yeah. So, when it comes to safe banking, I think that's something that that must pass in order to help the industry continue to mature. A business with banking is just a healthier business. What I've been very, very proud to see in the banking world is that despite safe banking not going through, there's been many, many banks that have engaged with the regulators to put forth a cannabis banking plan, knowing the risks that are involved. And we've seen bigger and bigger banks continue to step up to the plate to provide banking to customers. I actually think that it's becoming less and less true that cannabis operators can't access banking. We're seeing many, many more operators get really access to open banking, but it's still expensive and it is limiting in the types of services they're able to offer.
When you say that, are you speaking to more niche banks that cater specifically to cannabis related companies, or are you talking about even big banks, big private banks?
So both, but mostly bigger private banks. So when I first joined LeafLink, we were having conversations with banks that were banking cannabis that had really less than $500 million of assets. In 2019, we saw more banks with $1 billion to $5 billion of assets step up, and this year alone, we've been able to talk to banks that have 20 billion plus of assets that are looking to serve the cannabis industry. We've also spoken to many of the national banks, and everyone is trying to figure out what's the right way to play. And the majority of bigger banks are waiting for safe banking to pass. However, there's a lot of very sizable institutions putting forth programs that are serving tier 1 entities, which are plant touching licensed entities. So I've been very, very proud to see the banking institutions step up and put forth productive plans to give access to banking to these customers despite safe banking not passing.
I mean, that's encouraging to hear. On in my experience, it hasn't been very easy. And the people I've talked to, so when these banks are stepping up and helping, is there a certain criteria for the company that they're looking for in terms of how much revenue they've generated and things like that, or is it kind of across the board?
Yeah, so it's definitely helping more the larger, more sophisticated businesses. I think compliance is king, right? And when you operate a cash business and you're trying to get banking, there's a lot of questions that you simply can't answer because the books and records aren't going to look the way a normal business with banking and electronic records is going to look. But I think what I've seen a lot of banks do is try to educate their customers and leverage third-party regulatory technology firms to put forth programs that help them say yes more. There's a lot of technology out there that's trying to provide the necessary audit trails to ensure the cash that's going into the banking system is compliant, has been generated from the state activity that is legal under that state. So we've seen a lot of progress being made. It is probably an overstep to say that banking is accessible, but I think it's definitely approaching an arena where more and more businesses should have access to banking, but the types of services that are going to be offered are still going to be limited compared to a normal business outside of the cannabis industry.
Right, right. And you mentioned earlier, I mean, that there has been progression. The banking sector when it comes to cannabis has evolved. So what do you expect to see from banking in the future? And maybe we do two scenarios, okay? We do a current Biden administration and the future outlook of banking, and if somehow miraculously Trump is able to take this to the Supreme Court and they overturn it and he's president, what does the banking laws look like there?
Yeah, so I think the Senate's actually the real question there. I think the House has shown their support for multiple cannabis regulation, safe banking being one of them, and I think the Senate is really going to decide whether or not safe banking goes through. So if we end up having a blue Senate and a blue presidency, I think that it's more than likely that before the end of the year, safe banking does pass, and there's going to be more open access to banking. But I don't think it changes right away because banks are slow moving because compliance, they're the deposits to come in and ensuring that they can handle the volume and the compliance burden that's going to result in taking on cannabis businesses. If the Safe Banking Act were to go through, though, I think that opens a door for the card networks to become more productive. And the card networks becoming more productive means less cash. That allows for consumers to pay via card, which then will limit the amount that these to handle, and then it won't move to the supply chain as it has been in the past. So I think in a blue Senate and blue presidency, I think that in 2022 we probably have a more traditional world where cannabis buyers can accept cards at the dispensary. There's been options available on both the consumer and B2B side, and most businesses will have open access to banking more to run their business. Yeah, so if the Senate remains red and we have a red presidency somehow, I think that there's still a possibility that these bills get blocked. However, what's happened over the past year plus is you're seeing overwhelming support at the state level for cannabis decriminalization and regulation that supports these businesses. So I still think it's a possibility that some of these bills do pass given the overwhelming public support, despite it being red or blue. But I think it's a longer battle if we do have a red Senate and somehow the presidency gets flipped.
Yeah. Well, so like in my opinion, I feel like cannabis reform and legalization is a bipartisan issue. It's obvious that both candidates have stated kind of their plans and what they'll do, and Biden's been more vocal on that for sure. But my question is like, and I could be wrong, but I know that the Safe Banking Act and other components of cannabis reform have been baked into certain stimulus packages and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
And so like that politicizes it, right? Because it's like, look, we're talking about one issue here and why are you doing that? And it kind of hurts the industry overall. So like, I mean, is it your viewpoint that these bills should really just stand on their own because they can? Or I mean, is it obviously it'd be nice to get them through, but it's almost like it's more damaging than helpful.
Yeah, they should be able to stand on their own, and it's really unfortunate they're not. I think the fact that you have over 33 states that have a productive program in place should say all that you need to know. That the majority of states are proactively addressing the issue, and it's time for the federal government to get on board. I also think we're in an interesting economic environment where COVID has put the states in debt even further. It's going to put the country in further debt, and obviously cannabis is an amazing source of tax revenue. But in order to achieve that tax revenue, you need to allow these businesses to operate like a normal business. And I think by supporting it at the federal level, you get rid of things like 280E, which would be removed in something like the MORE Act. But getting safe banking off the ground and passed will allow these businesses not to be dealing with so much cash and making it safer to be operating cannabis businesses. So, like, to me, it makes too much sense, just given the economic environment and the fact that all these states have already put productive programs in place and the tax revenue speaks for itself. But it is being politicized, and the fact that it's being put in stimulus bills, I think, is a good sign that these are important issues to House members and eventually Senate members, that they need to and understand that this is something that needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. Yeah, I think that you're spot on there. And we touched on this earlier with the sweeping of these states, New Jersey being one, going for adult use. How do you think that will impact the state in which LeafLink is based, which is New York?
Uh, we we've been since inception. We have also had offices in California and have had remote employees across a number of legal states. We also have an office in Canada for our LeafLink International business, which is a JV with Canopy Rivers. But I think we're going to continue to have New York be our hub. I think that 2021 and 2022 should be a big East Coast swing. I think that the West Coast started the train and it's going to end on the East Coast. I think New Jersey passing, it's inevitable for New York and Connecticut to follow suit, just given where it's smashed together. And I think Pennsylvania is right there with it. So I think once those things happen, now you have Maryland below it with a productive program. I think everything starts to follow. I think New Jersey passing was huge, and I think it's going to be very important that they put their policies in place in a way that makes sense for the geography of where they sit, because it's going to have a major impact on what New York does and ultimately what Connecticut does. And obviously, Massachusetts already being a rec state, they have a certain model, but there's a lot of learnings that can be had for how Massachusetts went legal, and hopefully New Jersey can have a super productive program that becomes a model for the rest of the East Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, oh man, it's so critical right now for collaboration, and or even just kind of seeing what's working and what not in these other states, and kind of adapting and fitting what works for your state, because there is so many learnings and lessons right now that could be taken advantage of. Um, so Doug, is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with, or
Totally. I
before?
think I would.
Oh shit. Sorry, we have a lag to the audience. So Doug, please finish your thought.
Oh no, I was just saying I really wish the states would talk to each other more about what works and what doesn't work, and how they can better communicate to take the learnings from each other. So that there's certain states that I think have put a lot of very positive things in place, and others that have learned from certain mistakes. And I think again, more collaboration the better as we continue to solve the industry.
Yeah, it's so important, especially because I'm talking to people now who are specific on the THC side, and then you've got people that are CBD, and then you've got industrial hemp, and they all need to be talking, because there's even the topic of zoning laws, and like making sure that your hemp farm isn't too close to an outdoor THC grow, because you could feminize the plants, and you could ruin them, you could ruin the crop and whatnot. So there's got to be this talking, this collaboration, because there's going to be so many areas where each kind of sector touches one another, either in a good way or a bad way, right? So it's vital at this point.
Yeah, definitely is.
Yeah. Well, hey Doug, so let's wrap up here, man. I know that you're a busy guy and you got to get going. So is there anything you want to leave the audience with, or touch on before we wrap up here?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, Kevin, to have me on and get to discuss LeafLink and LeafLink Financial and the industry as a whole. I think next year is going to be a super exciting year for both LeafLink and the industry. There's a lot of tailwinds pushing us all forward, and super excited to continue to grow and have the industry grow with us.
Absolutely. And hopefully we can catch up sooner than 10 years the next time. So if I'm ever in New York or if you're ever in Dallas, let's hang out, man. Let's catch up. And I'd love to have you back on as things evolve.
Totally, man. Would definitely love to do that. Both the catch up over a beer and come back on the show.
Cool. Right on, Doug. Well, keep blazing the trails, man, and doing great work at LeafLink Financial. Where can people find you? Website, social media before we go.
Yeah, so LeafLink Financial is part of LeafLink Inc. So leaflink.com. You can get all the information you need about the marketplace and the financial platform. And then my social is pretty private, but you can find me on LinkedIn. It's just Douglas Gordon, and for LeafLink.
There you go. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks again, Doug, and we'll be running it back real soon. Okay.
Sounds great, man. Thanks for the time.
Yes, and thank you all for listening. Bye.